The year was 1878, when the scars of the Civil War were still fresh and the Apache Wars bled across the deserts of New Mexico. The frontier was a place where law came second to hunger, and dignity could be bought or sold for less than a man's supper. That was the year Elias Yazzie, a solitary Apache rancher with little more than his horse and a weather-worn cabin in the Chusca Mountains, walked into the plaza of Santa Fe and spent his last 2 pesos on the veiled girl no one else would claim. The sign above the rough-hewn platform read, "Bride Auction, Town Sanctioned." Men laughed, shouted, waved coins like they were buying cattle. But when the final girl stepped forward, face hidden beneath a coarse brown shawl, silent as stone, the crowd jeered. "A ghost," one spat, "not even worth a single peso." Elias stood among them with empty pockets and a heavier soul. Hunger had hollowed him for weeks, but something deeper kept him rooted there. When the bidding died in mockery, his voice cut through the noise. "2 pesos," he said. Laughter followed him like a curse, but no one challenged the bid. In that instant, a man with nothing claimed what others despised. She followed him out of Santa Fe without a word, her hands pale against the saddle leather, her silence heavier than the desert sky. Behind them, the plaza returned to laughter, but the story had only begun. Because the girl was not a ghost. Her name was Isabella Montoya, daughter of Don Rafael Montoya, a Spanish land baron ruined by war, by drought, and finally by his own gambling debts. He had sold his child to pay what pride could not cover. Elias did not yet know the truth of her blood, nor the storm it carried. He only knew that he had walked away with a stranger veiled in shame, and perhaps with the only second chance God still meant for him. 3 weeks later, as spring storms rolled across the mountains, riders came. First scouts, then soldiers, then hired guns with rifles on their backs. By dusk, 50 men circled the cabin in the high valley where Elias and Isabella had tried to carve a silence of their own. What began as 2 silver coins on a dusty afternoon in Santa Fe had become a siege. And all because one man refused to believe that a woman's worth could be measured by the weight of another man's laughter. The canyon wind moaned like an old hymn through broken stone. Elias Yazzie crouched low behind a twisted juniper, the silver revolver slick in his palm. 30 paces away, a mountain lion watched him, its pale eyes steady, tail flicking slow, daring. Between them lay a rabbit, freshly killed, blood staining the dust. It had been Elias's snare, his one good catch in days, and the cat had claimed it as its own. He had eaten nothing but bitter roots and dry deer hide stretched thin as paper. His belly ached, his hands shook. He had 1 bullet left, 1 chance. He could squeeze the trigger, risk missing, starve tomorrow. Or he could watch and wait and let the hunger carve him hollow. The lion blinked once, then turned, slipping into the shadows without a sound. Elias exhaled, but not in relief. He did not believe in relief anymore, only in the rhythm of another breath he had not earned. When the darkness fell, he lit no fire. He stood instead in the yard of his lonely cabin, staring at a sky heavy with stars and silence. Somewhere, someone lay in a warm bed, belly full, laughter near. Elias had only the cold bite of mountain wind, the smell of cedar smoke long faded, and the company of ghosts that would not leave him. By morning he had decided. If God had spared him from the lion, perhaps he had spared him for something more. He took the 2 pesos left in his pouch, his last silver, and saddled the mare that still carried more ribs than muscle. Without ceremony, without even closing the cabin door behind him, Elias rode down from the Chuscas toward Santa Fe. The road cut through dry stone and sky that stretched forever. Dust devils spun like spirits across the plain. Thunder rolled far to the west, where spring storms prowled the horizon. He did not stop once. 3 days he rode, drinking from shallow creeks, chewing what jerky remained, and whispering no prayers but the ones he had memorized as a child. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Psalm 23:4. By the third morning, Santa Fe shimmered ahead of him, a mirage built of clay and promise. The city was alive with sound, wagon wheels clattering, boots on cobblestone, children chasing each other between adobe walls. Life crowded every street. But beneath the noise, Elias recognized the same hunger that gnawed at his own bones. Every man here was searching for fortune, for future, or for a way to forget what he had lost. He tied his horse at the edge of the plaza. A crude wooden platform had been built in the square, draped in colored cloth that fluttered in the wind. The sign nailed above it was written by a hand too proud to feel shame. Bride auction, town sanctioned, no refunds, no questions. Elias touched the pouch at his belt, felt the weight of 2 silver coins, and lowered the brim of his hat. He had not come for laughter or bargaining. He had come to gamble with the last of his soul. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar smoke and old earth, as if the mountain itself had crept inside to rest. Elias pushed the door open with a slow hand, the hinges groaning from years of wind and weather. He stepped aside, motioning her to enter first. She hesitated, still veiled beneath the coarse brown shawl, her shoulders tight with a guarded dignity. Inside, the room was spare. A dirt floor swept clean, a rough-hewn table beneath a narrow window, and a cot tucked close to the hearth. No luxuries. Nothing to distract from the silence that settled heavy as stone. Elias set down a small sack of dried venison and lit the fire. The flames caught reluctantly, flickering orange against the soot-stained stones, throwing shadows that seemed too large for the small room. She did not sit. She stood in the half-light with arms folded, her face hidden, her stillness sharp. He glanced once at her, then back to the fire, choosing not to press. He knew the look of someone cornered. "You hungry?" His voice was low, roughened by dust and long days of not using it. She gave the smallest nod. Elias tore a strip of jerky and held it out, not stepping too close. She reached slowly, her fingers pale in the glow, and took it without a word. He stepped back, giving her the space she clung to like armor. They ate in silence. The only sounds were the brittle snap of firewood and the restless sigh of the mountain wind pressing against the walls. Elias chewed slowly, his eyes lowered. He had lived with silence before, months of it, years of it. But this silence felt different, not empty, but weighted, as if every unspoken word between them carried the echo of some wound neither had the strength to name. He finished first, set his strip aside, and leaned back on the stool. "You don't have to say anything tonight," he said, "not until you want to." She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased just enough that the firelight reached the edges of her shawl. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something less harsh than fear. Night deepened outside, stars spilling across the sky in cold brightness. Elias unrolled a spare blanket by the hearth and stretched it out flat. "You take the cot," he said quietly. "I'll stay near the fire." Still she did not speak. She moved toward the bed, her figure stiff in the flickering light, then turned her back to him. Elias settled onto the floor, his shoulders against the wall, the fire warming his boots. He could feel her presence in the room, silent, wary, but alive. And for the first time in months, the loneliness that had haunted him seemed to shift, just slightly, into something else. Before sleep took him, he whispered into the dim, not sure if she would hear. "The world's cruel enough. You won't find cruelty here." She did not answer, but her hands, hidden beneath the shawl, loosened their grip on the blanket. The fire had burned low by dawn, leaving the cabin cool and damp. Elias stirred awake to a faint sound, the soft scrape of metal against stone. For a moment he thought it was the mountain wind or a coyote outside. Then he caught the smell. Coffee. Weak, thin, but coffee nonetheless. He sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. She was crouched by the hearth, still veiled, the shawl casting her face in shadow. A dented tin pot rested on the coals, steam curling upward in hesitant threads. Her hands moved with quiet certainty, as though muscle memory guided them more than will. "That yours or mine?" Elias asked, his voice rough from sleep. A pause. Then, for the first time, her voice, low and unsteady, but steady enough to carry. "My mother used to make it, even when there was nothing else to cook." The sound of her speech was soft, like stone struck under water, yet it filled the room more than the fire ever could. Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening. "Some mornings," she continued, almost to herself, "it was all we had. Just water boiled long, with grounds we used again and again. She said the smell was enough to remind us we were still alive." She poured into 2 cups, sliding one across the table. Elias took it without hurry, letting the warmth settle in his hands before drinking. The taste was bitter, weak, but it was more than bitterness, he felt. It was the first glimpse of her, not the shawl, not the silence, but the memory she carried with her. He studied her carefully. "Your mother sounds like a woman who knew how to keep a family breathing when the world wanted to choke them." The corner of her shawl shifted, as if she had almost smiled, but it vanished before it began. Elias took another sip, then spoke, his voice quieter than before. "I've seen the desert swallow good men whole, but I've also seen God do things no man expected. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it?" He let the words of Isaiah 43:19 hang in the air, not as a sermon, only as a truth. Her hand stilled on the cup. She did not answer, but she did not flinch either. Something in her posture softened, barely, but enough for Elias to notice. They finished in silence, but it was no longer the same silence that had filled the cabin the night before. This silence carried something lighter, a thread pulled taut between 2 lives that had been frayed too long. When she set the cup down, her hands were no longer clenched. Elias saw it, and he let the moment stand without reaching for more. He only nodded once, slow and sure, as if to say he heard her, he believed her, and that was enough. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of pine through the cracks in the cabin walls. For the first time, Elias thought the place smelled less like loneliness and more like beginning. The third night came colder than the last, the fire snapping restless against the chill. Elias sat sharpening his knife at the table, steel whispering over stone in steady rhythm. Across the room, Isabella stood by the window, veil still drawn, hands folded so tightly they seemed carved from wood. She had spoken little since the morning of coffee. A word here, a gesture there. Enough to show she was listening, but not enough to ease the weight of the shawl she carried like a second skin. At length, Elias set the knife aside. "You don't owe me secrets," he said, eyes on the flame, "but a man can't sit in the dark forever." Silence held. Then, with a breath that shook more than she wished, Isabella reached for the edge of the shawl. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. Slowly, she pulled the coarse fabric away from her face. Her hair spilled loose, black as raven feathers. Her skin was warm clay in the firelight, her eyes the gray of river stone after rain. She did not lower her gaze. Instead, she watched him carefully, waiting for the flinch, the recoil, the disgust she had learned to expect. Elias only nodded, as if she had shown him nothing more shocking than a sunrise. "Thank you," he said simply. She blinked, her breath catching. "You're not surprised?" "I've seen beauty carry pain before," he answered. "It doesn't make either one less true." Her lips parted, then pressed tight again, unsure how to answer. She sank onto the stool across from him, her hands curling in her lap. "My name is Isabella Montoya," she said at last, voice low but firm. "My father sold me to pay his gambling debts." The words hung heavy, the fire cracked. Elias said nothing, letting the silence hold her confession without crushing it. "They told me to hide my face," she went on. "Said no one would want a Pueblo girl with mixed blood, not with Spanish pride behind her, not with Pueblo dust beneath her.
They said my face would only bring down the price." Her voice faltered. She turned her head slightly, ashamed of words she had carried like stones. Elias leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the table. "You were never the shame, Isabella. The shame belongs to the ones who change you with it." Her eyes met his, sharp, searching for pity, but she found none, only the weight of truth spoken plain. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, her shoulders lowered, as if the burden had shifted a fraction. Elias rose, placed another log on the fire, and sat back down. He did not press her further, nor did he look away. He simply shared the silence with her, this time not as strangers, but as two who had bared enough to begin. Outside, coyotes called across the valley, their cries raw and lonely. Inside, the cabin held a different sound, the quiet of a secret spoken and not despised. Spring sunlight slipped through the cabin's single window, painting the table in pale gold. Isabella worked beside it, hands busy with herbs she had gathered near the stream. She crushed them carefully, the sharp scent of sage and wild onion filling the room. Across from her, Elias mended a bridle strap, his knife moving with steady precision. The quiet between them was no longer brittle, it carried the ease of routine. That evening they ate together without words, beans stewed in a clay pot, venison browned on the fire. When Elias passed her the bread, their hands brushed. For the first time she did not pull away. He caught the faintest curl at the corner of her mouth, and the cabin felt less like stone. Later, as he split wood outside, she stepped to the doorway. The wind caught her hair loose, pulling strands across her face. "You work too hard," she said, almost teasing. He paused, axe balanced mid-air, and gave a rare half-smile. "A man with no work has no reason to stand." She shook her head softly, the sound of her breath like laughter. It startled them both. For months Elias had lived with only silence for company. Now the sound of her voice, unguarded for a heartbeat, lingered like a promise. But peace in the mountains was thin as smoke. It never stayed long. The knock came just as dusk deepened. 2 measured strikes, firm and familiar. Elias stiffened, hand going to the rifle leaning by the door. He opened it slow. A tall figure stood there, shoulders broad beneath a worn Union coat, braids brushing his collar. A crooked grin spread across his face. "Still bad at greetings, Yazi," the man said. For the first time in weeks, Elias smiled without effort. "Samuel." They clasped shoulders, the brief embrace of men who had once survived worse than hunger together. Samuel stepped inside, removing his hat, his dark eyes sweeping the cabin. He paused when they landed on Isabella. "So this is the one," he said with warmth, "the girl who put color back in this ghost." Isabella's chin lifted, her tone sharp. "I'm the one he paid 2 pesos for." Samuel blinked, then laughed deep. "Then he made the best bargain in Santa Fe. Look at this place, it's even clean." Her lips curved despite herself, though her eyes stayed wary. She turned back to her work, but the faint smile lingered, betraying that she listened. Samuel leaned close to Elias, voice dropping. "I heard talk down south. Rumors of a veiled girl, an Apache bitter, a father angry enough to raise half a county." Elias's jaw tightened. "Raphael?" Samuel nodded. "Don Rafael Montoya, rich again, loud again, and telling anyone who listened that his daughter was stolen." Isabella froze mid-motion, the pestle slipping against the clay bowl. Her face hardened, eyes fixed on the herbs that no longer held her attention. "I wasn't stolen," she said flatly. "I was sold." Samuel's gaze softened. "I believe you, but men like him don't deal in truth. They deal in control, and he won't rest until he thinks he has you back." The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. The little cabin that had begun to feel like shelter now seemed smaller, its walls closing with the weight of a shadow that had finally found them. The night after Samuel's warning, the cabin felt heavier. Elias tended the fire, but its warmth did little to ease the silence pressing on the walls. Isabella sat near the hearth, a small leather-bound book clutched tight in her hands. She had kept it hidden since they left Santa Fe, wrapped in cloth beneath her belongings. Now it lay bare, the cracked spine catching the glow of the flames. "My mother's journal," she said softly, not looking at Elias. "She wrote prayers in it, poems too. I used to think the words would protect me." She opened it slowly. The pages were yellowed, ink faded but still legible. Her mother's hand was neat, steady, the kind of writing that carried patience. Isabella traced the lines with her finger, her lips forming silent echoes. Elias said nothing. He knew the look of someone standing at the edge of an old wound. "When I was a child," she whispered, "my father told me I carried two kinds of blood, Pueblo from my mother, Spanish from him. He said I must never forget which one ruled the other. Every time I laughed too loud or spoke with my mother's tongue, he would remind me, 'You are Montoya, not Pueblo. Do not shame us.'" Her voice hardened. "But I was never Montoya enough, and I was never Pueblo enough, so I belonged nowhere." The fire cracked, sparks drifting upward. She held the journal closer, her hands trembling. "I kept this because it was the only part of her I had left, but it chained me too. Every word in here told me to pray for forgiveness for being born what I am." Her breath hitched, but her eyes did not turn away from the flame. She opened to the last page, stared at it a moment, then closed the book with finality. Elias leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "You don't need forgiveness for blood, only for the choices we make." She turned to him, eyes bright with a fierce, quiet defiance. "Then tonight I choose not to carry her shame anymore." Before he could answer, she laid the journal on the fire. The leather curled, the pages blackened, the inked words rising as smoke. For a moment, the cabin filled with the bitter scent of burning leather. Then only ashes remained. She straightened, her shoulders squared, her face lit by the glow of the dying prayer book. Elias watched her with the solemnity of a man witnessing more than fire. "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come." 2 Corinthians 5:17. The words hung in the air, not heavy, but liberating. Isabella closed her eyes, letting them settle inside her. When she opened them again, her gaze was clear, her hands empty. Outside, the wind carried the ashes into the night. Inside, Isabella sat taller, as though some weight she had never chosen had finally let her go. The morning after the journal burned, the cabin was quiet, but not heavy as before. Isabella stood outside, gathering water from the stream, her hands steady. For the first time since Santa Fe, she moved without the weight of the veil. Her hair lifted in the breeze, her face open to the light. Elias watched from the doorway. There was no triumph in his gaze, only a solemn recognition. A chapter had closed. But the story ahead would not wait. By midday, hoofbeats sounded along the ridge. Elias reached for his rifle, but Samuel raised a hand. "Not soldiers," he said, his ear tuned to the rhythm. "Only one rider, and one who knows these hills." The rider came slowly, a woman wrapped in woven Pueblo shawl, her long braids streaked with gray. She dismounted with care, her movements strong despite age. When her eyes found Isabella, they softened with recognition. "Rosa Tenorio," Isabella breathed, almost in disbelief. The older woman placed her hands on Isabella's shoulders. "Child, I prayed the mountain would bring you back to me. Now I see it has." Inside the cabin, Rosa set out her bundle, cornmeal in a clay bowl, sage tied with rawhide, a small gourd of ashes. She worked without haste, each motion practiced, steady. Isabella knelt beside her, watching. Rosa spoke as she sprinkled the cornmeal in a circle near the hearth. "We cleanse not to erase the past, but to remind the heart it does not belong to chains. Corn for life, sage for truth, ashes for what is gone. She placed the ashes in Isabella's palm. "This is what your mother carried, but you are not bound by it." Isabella's fingers curled around the black dust. For a long moment she did not breathe. Then she released it into the fire, watching the tiny sparks leap and fade. Rosa's voice lowered. "Your father's voice will call you, loud, cruel, unyielding. But you must know which voice belongs to the living God, and which belongs only to fear." Elias, standing near, spoke softly, his voice firm. "Fear is not the final word." Rosa nodded. "No, life is, always life." The ritual ended in silence. The cabin smelled of sage and smoke, the air lighter, clearer, as if the mountain itself had leaned closer. Isabella lifted her chin. Her face still bore the lines of sorrow, but her eyes no longer hid. She turned to Elias, her voice steady. "I will not run any more. If Raphael comes, he will see the daughter he tried to sell, and he will learn I am not his to command." Samuel's grin was grim but approving. "That's the voice he won't know how to silence." Elias said nothing, but he reached for the rifle leaning by the wall and checked the chamber with calm certainty. The choice had been made. Whatever storm was coming, they would not face it as shadows in hiding. They would stand as those made new. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The Santa Fe courtroom was crowded that morning, the air heavy with sweat, tobacco, and the restless murmur of voices. Dust filtered through tall windows, catching in the sunlight like suspended ash. Men in broad hats leaned against the walls, their eyes sharp with curiosity. For many, it was not justice they had come to see, but spectacle. Montoya's daughter brought back like a runaway mule. Don Rafael Montoya sat near the front, his silver cane glinting in the light, his rings clicking against the wood as he drummed impatient fingers. His presence filled the room the way thunder filled a canyon. Dressed in rich black wool, his beard oiled and trimmed, he wore the arrogance of a man who had never been told no in public. Isabella stood across from him, her shawl lowered, her face uncovered. For the first time, she did not hide. Her dark hair spilled freely over her shoulders, her eyes fixed not on the floor, but on her father. The crowd hushed as she raised her chin. The magistrate cleared his throat. "Señor Montoya claims his daughter has been wrongfully taken, that she belongs under his authority, as her blood and name dictate." Murmurs rose, some nodded, others glanced between Isabella and Elias, who stood silent at the edge of the room, rifle slung but hands folded, not interfering. Don Rafael leaned forward, voice smooth but sharp. "The girl is mine. She bears my name, my blood, and she will return to my house as she should never have left." The words struck like a whip. Isabella's hands trembled for a moment, but she did not waver. She took a single step forward, her voice carrying with clarity that silenced the room. "My name is Isabella," she said, "but I am not Montoya's daughter, not anymore." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Raphael's face darkened, his knuckles whitening on the silver cane. "You dare deny me? You are my blood, my flesh!" Her gaze held him, steady as stone. "The day you sold me, you lost the right to call me yours. You did not sell a servant, you sold your own child. That was the day the name Montoya ceased to mean father." The room erupted, half in shock, half in disbelief. Some men muttered oaths under their breath. Others watched Raphael, waiting for his retaliation. His voice thundered, raw with fury. "You ungrateful wretch! You think this farce frees you? You will crawl back to me on your knees before this is done." Isabella did not flinch. She stood taller, her hands steady at her sides. "I will not crawl, not to you, not ever again."
For the first time, Raphael seemed shaken, his fury tripping over itself. He slammed his cane to the floor, the crack echoing against the rafters. "This is not finished," he spat, his voice breaking under the weight of humiliation. Isabella did not flinch. She stood taller, her hands steady at her sides. "I will not crawl, not to you, not ever again." For the first time, Raphael seemed shaken, his fury tripping over itself. He slammed his cane to the floor, the crack echoing against the rafters. "This is not finished," he spat, his voice breaking under the weight of humiliation.
The magistrate raised his hand for order, but the moment had already burned itself into memory. Isabella had spoken, before her father, before the town, before the law, and there was no turning back. Elias, watching from the edge, let out the breath he had been holding. In that instant, he saw not the frightened girl from the auction, but a woman who had claimed her dignity in full view of the world. The ride back from Santa Fe was quiet. The courtroom echoes still clung to Isabella's ears, the gasps, the murmurs, her father's final vow of revenge. The desert stretched wide around them, but even in that open silence, she felt the walls of danger closing in. At the cabin, Samuel stabled the horses, while Elias went straight to the forge behind the shed. The steady rhythm of hammer on metal broke the dusk air, each strike ringing sharp as a church bell. Isabella stood at the doorway, watching sparks leap like fireflies. "What are you making?" she asked at last. Elias did not look up. His hands moved with the certainty of old habit, shaping something small from a piece of silver he had kept hidden. "A ring," he said simply. She blinked. "For me?" He set the hammer aside, lifting the half-formed band with tongs. The glow faded as it cooled, the surface smooth but unfinished. "For whoever chooses to wear it," he answered. His voice was calm, but there was weight beneath it. Isabella stepped closer, the forge heat brushing her face. She studied the silver circle in his palm, fragile and unadorned. Her throat tightened. "Why now?" Elias finally met her eyes. "Because you should know the difference. A chain is forced on the wrist. A ring is chosen." The words struck her deeper than she expected. All her life, choices had been stripped away. Where she lived, what name she bore, whom she was sold to. And here, in the shadow of danger, this man placed freedom in her hands. She reached for the ring, but stopped short, her fingers trembling. "If I take it, then what?" "Then it means nothing more than what you want it to mean," Elias said. His voice carried no demand, only truth. "Not my possession, not my command, only your choice." The forge crackled, the last glow fading to ember. Isabella looked down at the silver, then back at Elias. His eyes held no expectation, only patience. Slowly, she closed his hand around the ring instead of taking it. "Not yet," she whispered, "but thank you for giving me what no one else has." Elias nodded once, accepting. He tucked the ring into a leather pouch and set it on the shelf. No words bound her, only the possibility, waiting. That night, as the fire burned low in the cabin, Isabella lay awake listening to the quiet. The courtroom had stripped away her old name, but here, in the mountain silence, she realized something more dangerous. Freedom was not just what she had claimed in public. It was what she had to embrace in her own heart. And soon she would have to prove it. The knock came at sundown, hard, deliberate, the kind that carried threat more than courtesy. Samuel had already been on watch near the tree line and slipped inside, his voice low. 3 men, armed, they ride with Montoya's crest. Elias set aside his rifle, though his jaw tightened. "Stay behind me," he began, but Isabella shook her head. "No, this is mine." Before he could argue, she pulled the door open. The 3 riders sat astride their horses just beyond the clearing, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. One dismounted, spurs clinking against stone as he stepped forward. "Señorita Montoya," he called, his voice smooth but cold. "Your father demands your return. You have shamed him in public long enough." The name pierced like an old wound, but Isabella did not flinch. She stepped into the clearing, her shawl loose, her face uncovered for all to see. The men's eyes widened. They had expected a cowering girl, not a woman who stood straight as the pines. "I am not Señorita Montoya," she said, her voice carrying steady. The rider sneered. "You bear his name, his blood. That cannot be denied." She lifted her chin, the fading sun catching in her eyes. "Blood is not loyalty. Blood is not love. And the day he sold me was the day I ceased being his daughter." The words fell like an axe, cutting through the clearing. Even the horses shifted uneasily, as if they felt the weight of it. The man's expression hardened. "Careful, girl, you speak against your father in open defiance. He commands more than soldiers. He commands the law." Isabella stepped closer, her hands steady at her sides. "Then let him command the law. Let him command the world."
"But he will never command me again." From the porch, Elias stood ready, Samuel's bow strung at his side. Yet neither moved, for they saw what was unfolding was not theirs to fight. This was Isabella's war, and her weapon was truth. The rider spat into the dust. "You'll regret those words when your father comes himself." Isabella did not blink. "I have lived with regret my whole life, but not tonight." For a moment, silence stretched, brittle as glass. Then the man mounted his horse again, fury stiffening his movements. With a sharp whistle, the three wheeled and rode back into the dusk, the sound of hooves fading into the canyon. When the dust settled, Isabella stood alone in the clearing, her breath steady, her shoulders unbowed. She turned slowly, meeting Elias's gaze. For the first time, he saw not just resilience, but a fierce kind of freedom, the kind that could never be bought or broken. Inside, the firelight waited, but outside, the world had changed. Her words could not be taken back, and neither could her freedom. Night settled over the cabin like a heavy cloak. The forest beyond was hushed, as if even the crickets sensed what was coming.
Samuel had taken the first watch outside, his shadow pacing the tree line. Inside, the fire crackled low, throwing restless light across the walls. Isabella sat by the table, her hands folded in her lap. The leather pouch lay before her, untouched since Elias placed it there. She had avoided it for days, afraid of the weight it carried. Not the silver ring itself, but what it asked of her, a choice. Elias worked silently near the fire, oiling the rifle with slow, careful motions. His presence filled the room, steady as always, yet he did not look at her. He would not force her hand. That silence spoke louder than any demand. At last, Isabella opened the pouch. The ring slid into her palm, cool against her skin. She studied it by firelight, the simple band, unadorned, yet strong, shaped by hands that had known labor and loss. Her throat tightened. She remembered her father's chains, words, commands, threats dressed as protection. And she remembered Elias's words at the forge. "A chain is forced, a ring is chosen." For so long, every choice had been taken from her. Tonight, she held one that was hers alone. Elias finally spoke, his voice quiet. "You don't owe me anything, Isabella. Not this, not ever." She looked up at him. His eyes were calm, but weary too, as if bracing for her refusal. She rose slowly, crossing the room until she stood before him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she slipped the ring onto her finger. It caught the firelight, gleaming faint but sure. "This is not because you ask," she said. "It is because I choose." Elias's jaw tightened, his hand pausing on the rifle. He met her gaze, and in it he found not submission, but fire. The same fire that had carried her through courtroom, clearing, and exile. He nodded once, almost reverently. Then it means more than I ever hoped. A silence followed, but it was no longer heavy. It was the silence of two souls bound not by command, but by choice. Outside, the wind stirred the pines, carrying with it the faint echo of distant hooves. Samuel's voice called low from the darkness. "They're coming. By dawn, we'll see them." Isabella's hand tightened around the ring. She turned toward the door, her face lit by fire and resolve. Whatever storm approached, she would not meet it as the girl who had been sold. She would meet it as the woman who chose her own name, her own freedom, her own love.
Dawn broke red over the mountains, the sky streaked like a wound. Dust rose along the ridge before the sound reached them, hooves, many of them, pounding the earth in rhythm. Ricardo Montoya came not alone, but with a column of riders, their banners snapping in the wind. They halted before the cabin clearing. Samuel and Elias stood ready, rifles in hand, while Isabella stepped forward. Her shawl was gone, her hair braided tight, her face set with calm resolve. Ricardo dismounted with deliberate grace, his cane striking the ground, his eyes glinting with cruel triumph. In his hand he held a folded parchment, sealed in red wax. "My daughter," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing, "you may deny me before peasants and magistrates, but law is stronger than rebellion. Here," he raised the paper high, "is your marriage license, signed and stamped. You wed as I command, and your shame will be washed away." A murmur rippled among the riders. Some nodded approval, others watched Isabella with pity. She did not move until he thrust the paper toward her, as if presenting a verdict. Then, with steady hands, she took it. Her eyes scanned the neat script, the signatures, the seal of authority. It was everything her father had built his life upon: power, reputation, control. Then she lifted her gaze, her voice clear as mountain wind. "You believe this paper makes you master of my life, but it is only ink, and ink cannot chain a soul." Ricardo sneered, stepping closer. "Ink is law, and law is mine." Isabella's fingers tightened on the parchment. She drew in a breath, and in that silence her voice rose, strong and unshaken. "Then hear this truth, Father. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:32. With one swift motion, she tore the paper in half. The sound of ripping echoed through the clearing like thunder. She tore it again and again until the pieces fluttered to the ground like broken wings. Gasps erupted. Men shifted in their saddles, stunned. Ricardo froze, his face draining of color, then flushing crimson with rage. His cane trembled in his grip. "You dare!" he roared, but his words faltered against the sight of her standing tall, the tatters of his authority at her feet. Isabella's voice did not waver. "You sold me once. You tried to bind me again. But today, before God and all who watch, I am no longer your possession. I am free." Elias stepped closer, his rifle lowered but ready, his eyes fixed on Ricardo. Samuel drew his bow, the string taut. Yet it was clear to all, the true battle had already been won, and it had not been fought with weapons. Ricardo staggered back, chest heaving, his power crumbling not from bullets, but from the truth spoken aloud. For a long moment, the clearing was frozen. The scraps of parchment still drifted in the morning air, glinting like ash in the sunlight. No one moved, neither Elias with his rifle, nor Samuel with his bow, nor the riders shifting uneasily in their saddles. All eyes were fixed on Ricardo Montoya. His chest heaved, his face dark with fury, yet his cane trembled in his grip. The man who had commanded estates, soldiers, and fear now found himself powerless before the one he had called daughter. "You shame me before my men," he rasped, voice raw. "You shame the blood that bore you." Isabella stood unmoved. Her hand rested lightly over the silver ring, gleaming at her finger. "It is not shame to reject chains," she said. "It is only truth.
And the truth has made me free." The words struck harder than any bullet. Around them, murmurs rose among the riders. Some shifted with doubt, others looked away from their master. Authority, once unquestioned, wavered in the open air. Ricardo turned, eyes wild, searching his men for loyalty. "You ride with me. You ride with Montoya blood and Montoya law." But their silence betrayed him. Not one spurred forward. The power that had ruled their obedience cracked under the weight of Isabella's defiance. Elias stepped forward then, his rifle still lowered, his voice calm but unyielding. "Take your men, Don Rafael. Leave this place. Your claim is finished." Ricardo's glare burned, but the fight had gone out of him. He could order an attack, but even he saw it. The tide had shifted. To spill blood now would not restore his pride, only prove his defeat. With a guttural curse, he swung onto his horse. His men followed, some with reluctance, others with visible relief. The ground shook as they wheeled and thundered back down the ridge, dust rising like smoke behind them. Silence fell again over the clearing.
Only the tattered remnants of the marriage license remained, scattered at Isabella's feet. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders loosening. Samuel let out a sharp laugh, more of release than humor. "Never seen the great Montoya turn tail like that." Elias did not laugh. His eyes were on Isabella, steady and proud. "You broke him," he said softly. She looked back at him, the morning light catching in her eyes. "No, I only spoke what was true. The breaking he carried inside himself." The fire of the forge, the courtroom, the clearing, all of it converged in this moment. She was no longer the veiled girl sold for $2. She was a woman who had faced her captor and stripped him of the only weapon he truly held, fear. And as the dust of Montoya's retreat faded into the horizon, Isabella knew that the battle was over, not with guns, not with death, but with freedom won by truth. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. The valley lay still in the days that followed. Where once the echo of hooves had rattled the mountain air, there was only the soft rush of wind through the pines and the steady murmur of the stream below. The earth itself seemed to breathe easier, as if relieved that blood had not been spilled. Inside the cabin, life found a quieter rhythm. Samuel tended the fire and brewed coffee at dawn, his low humming filling the silence with something almost like song. Elias repaired a broken hinge, his movements calm, no longer shadowed by constant vigilance. And Isabella, no longer the veiled girl of auctions and courtrooms, sat at the table, her face open, unhidden, the morning light warming her skin. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she smiled. Not the cautious curve of lips given to appease, but a smile born of release. It startled even her, and when Samuel caught sight of it, he chuckled. "Never thought I'd see that," he said, pouring dark coffee into a tin cup. "Looks good on ya, Nina." Elias glanced up from his work. He did not speak, but the faintest easing of his brow betrayed the same thought. The storm had passed, and in its wake, something new was blooming. Isabella's gaze drifted to the shelf where a charred leather journal lay. It was the prayer book her mother had kept, words once too heavy to bear, too bound to shame. In anger, she had once tried to destroy it. Now, with trembling hands, she reached for it. She opened to a page. The ink faded, the script delicate as though the letters themselves carried breath. For a long time she only looked, afraid of what memories might rise. But when she began to read aloud, her voice was steady. "Señor, though the world condemns, you do not. Though I am cast away, you gather me. Though my name is shamed, you call me daughter still." Her throat tightened, but she did not close the book. She let the words fill the cabin, words once buried in silence, now spoken into light. Samuel set down his cup, bowing his head. Elias, his hand still on the hinge, turned slightly, listening with the stillness of a man standing on holy ground. When she finished, she looked up. Her eyes glistened, but not from sorrow. "She prayed for a day like this," Isabella whispered, "a day her daughter would walk unafraid." Elias's voice was low, almost reverent, "And now she sees it." Silence followed, not heavy, but full, like soil rich after rain. Isabella closed the journal gently, not as a weight to be discarded, but as a treasure to be kept. As the fire crackled, she spoke again, this time not her mother's words, but scripture she herself had come to believe. Her voice rang with quiet certainty. "To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair." Isaiah 61:3. The words seemed to hang in the air, transforming the cabin. Ashes had marked her life, ashes of betrayal, loss, silence. But now beauty rose from them. Where there had been mourning, joy pressed forward. Where despair had dwelt, praise found its place. Elias's eyes softened. Samuel exhaled long, as though laying down a burden. And Isabella, closing the book, let the smile return. Not forced, not fragile, but whole. That night, the stars over the valley burned clear, as if the heavens themselves bore witness. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge from fear, but like a home. And within its walls, a woman who had once been sold for $2 now wore freedom like a crown. Weeks passed, and the cabin no longer carried the air of hiding. Its windows stood open to the valley, curtains lifted by mountain breezes. The sound of laughter sometimes spilled into the clearing, mingling with the song of meadowlarks. What had once been a place of shadows was now a home where light entered freely. Samuel packed his saddlebag one morning, his bow slung across his back. The time had come for him to return to his people in the south. Elias clasped his arm, rough hand meeting rough hand, and for a moment the silence between them said what words could not. Loyalty forged in fire does not break. Samuel turned to Isabella, his dark eyes kind. "The mountains kept you safe," he said. "Now keep them safe in return. The fire here," he gestured toward the hearth where flames licked the morning logs, "keep it burning for those yet to come." Isabella nodded, moved beyond speech. He gave her a smile, rare and fleeting, before riding down the trail, his figure growing smaller until the pines swallowed him. Later that week, Rosa Tenorio returned. The Pueblo healer carried with her a small wreath woven of dried corn husks, sage, and desert flowers. She pressed it into Isabella's hands. "For your doorway," Rosa said softly. "So all who enter will know this is a house of life." Isabella hung it above the cabin's entrance. Its pale golden strands caught the sunlight, a humble crown of renewal. One evening, as the sky blazed with sunset, Elias and Isabella walked beyond the cabin into the valley. The stream shimmered at their feet, and the mountains rose, solemn and steadfast, guardians of their new beginning. Elias paused, scanning the land that stretched before them, the ridges, the meadow, the cabin smoke curling into dusk. "This land," he said, his voice thoughtful, "it finally feels like home." Isabella slipped her hand into his. Her ring glimmered faintly, not as a mark of possession, but as a symbol of choice. She looked across the valley and answered, "Because we chose it, together." For a while they stood in silence, listening to the wind through the aspens. Then Isabella reached into her shawl and drew out a piece of cloth folded deep within. The old veil, the fabric that had once hidden her face at the auction, that had marked her shame and her silence. She held it in her hands a long moment. The weight of it was heavy with memory, fear, humiliation, years of chains.
But when she lifted her eyes, she no longer trembled. Isabella released the veil to the wind. It lifted like a ghost, twisting once in the fiery sky before the current carried it away, higher and higher, until it vanished against the horizon. Elias watched quietly, his hand firm around hers. No words were needed. The act spoke its own gospel. The past no longer bound her. As the last trace of cloth disappeared, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the valley. The mountains glowed, the water gleamed, and the air felt alive with promise. Isabella breathed deeply, her chest unburdened. For the first time, she saw not just survival ahead, but a future, one built not on commands or chains, but on freedom chosen, faith restored, and love unafraid. The cabin behind them, the land before them, and heaven above, it was enough. And so the story that had begun with a girl sold for $2 ended with a woman standing free, her veil carried away by wind and her spirit lifted by grace. As the sun sets on Isabella's journey, we are reminded that the West was never just about guns and dust. It was about people searching for freedom, dignity, and a place to belong. Perhaps you, too, carry memories of hardship, of moments when the world seemed to press too heavily upon your shoulders. And perhaps, like Isabella, you've discovered that even in the darkest valleys, there is a light that cannot be taken away. Stories like this one are more than history. They are mirrors reflecting the strength and grace found in ordinary souls. They remind us that courage is not loud, but steadfast, that faith, even when whispered, can change the course of a life. If this tale has touched you, stay with us. Subscribe for more true Wild West stories, narratives of grit, faith, and the unyielding hope that still speaks across the ages.